You're watching Growth Hacks, where we dive into how to scale your business. I'm your host, Ramon Ray. Thanks for being here. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Kedma Ough and Loren Feldman. Kedma is a small business coach and author of Target Funding. She's online at kedmaough.com. And Loren Feldman, he's the founder of the 21 Hats podcast and the 21 Hats Morning Report, all available at 21hats.com. Loren, I hope things have been fantastically well in your time since we last met. How are things in your world, Loren Feldman?
Here with you and Kedma, so things are really great today.
Awesome indeed. Good to have you with us. Kedma, how are things in your world? How are things?
Things are fantastic. We just closed on a $500,000 deal for a company that got denied by their lender. So I always say that's fantastic.
Awesome. That is indeed. You are definitely the superwoman for sure. So let's dive into the discussion today. And remember, to our audience, we're here to answer your questions and to help you scale your business. And most importantly, we want to hear from you and where you're turning in from. So Kedma and Loren, let's take a second here and let's see where people are dropping in from. So everybody, we're going to take 2 seconds right now in the chat. Tell us what country or what state or what city or what zip code. No, don't do the zip code. Country, state, or city you're hailing from. I'm from the vacation capital of the world, New Jersey. Loren's from somewhere. Kedma's from somewhere. So in the chat, let us know where you're from as we see those coming through. Okay? All right. Well, as you can see, Loren and Kedma, we have a global, amazing audience of Growth Hacks listeners today. So let's dive into it, shall we? International expansion can be an exciting journey, but one also filled with turbulence along the way. But we're here to help make it a smooth trip. We'll discuss today how to know if and when your company is ready to go global, how to choose which markets are right for you, and how to navigate business in a foreign country. We'll also hear from a company that was successful in expanding to 40 markets worldwide. Loren, I'm going to turn to you first. This expansion globally, Loren, can be a very complicated thing, but something that many small businesses want to do. What are you seeing, Loren? Some challenges, some problems to think about? I know for me, Loren, I'll just give my opinion first. I know that it can be tough. You know, there's all kind of things, new rules and regulations. Who are you going to hire? You have your product, if you're a US-based company, written in English. You have to translate that into often another market's dialect or language. What are some things that you've seen as some companies are trying to go global, Loren? Talk to us a bit.
Well, Ramon, you're absolutely right. It can be tough. There are challenges, and that's in normal times. But as we all know, these are not normal times. We got supply chain issues. We got travel issues. It's an especially challenging time. And here's the thing I'd start with. I just had this conversation with an entrepreneur recently who was thinking about it and decided to pull back and not do it right now. And the reason was she stopped and realized, you know what? I haven't really explored all the opportunities I have in this country. That's kind of the low-hanging fruit. I'm going to make sure I've, done everything I can do in my market here, and I'm going to put off thinking internationally for a little while.
Yeah, and that's good. I mean, listen, I think it's something to have to think about. There can be ambitious plans to do it. Maybe we should, maybe we won't, but I know we're going to talk to a company today, right? Bladnoch.
And I don't mean to say that you shouldn't do it,
right,
but I mean, you should think about it, and you should be sure it's the right time for you and that you're ready to go.
Correct. Because, Kedma, am I right? There are some successes and highs and reasons to do it that can build some good profitability. And as Loren said, it's very hard to fully saturate a market, but if you saturated where you're at, the next part to go for many companies could be global expansion. Talk to us, Kedma, about that.
Yeah, I would say I'm in an advantage because I actually have 3 passports. And no, I don't work for the CIA, but I have lived in the Middle East and I've lived in Europe. And I will tell you that those decisions should not be made lightly. That's why I'm so excited about today's guests. One of the things we have to really understand is that culture. And, a lot of times when we're coming into a new country, we think that how we're positioning our brand in the US is going to be the same in their culture. It's actually not true. And we have to understand that. The second thing is the threats. I can tell you from my country in the Middle East, it's an ongoing issue, and understanding the regulations and the restrictions is going to affect potential success of the company. And then the third is language. I remember years and years ago, a case where a company came in and provided baby food in a particular country. They had a picture of the baby on the item. And as you know, if you've done research, people in that culture thought, well, are you selling, babies in the baby food?
Ouch.
And it was so significant, they had to change their entire products because, again, it's that language and that education. So I'm so excited for today, just to learn on some of the challenges and some of the success from our guests.
Sure. And Loren, let's talk a bit of what some of the positives that can happen. I know in many cases, talking especially, I've interviewed a lot of companies that have an Asian background, as it were. I'll put it that way. And there's talking from a U.S. centric, even though we're a global audience here, but speaking from a U.S. centric, there's people and consumers in other countries that are yearning from U.S. products, or flip it around. People in the south of Africa who are yearning for products in the Middle East, whatever you want to take it. So let's talk about, Loren, there can be some huge upsides if you get it right.
Absolutely.
Globally, yeah?
Absolutely. And as usual, Kedma is completely right in laying out the challenges as she sees them. There's one advantage right now, and that is technology. There are ways to test markets that there didn't used to be. So you can find a consultant, you can find a marketplace platform. There are ways to see if your product translates into a different culture and figure that out before you spend a ton of money going over there and really trying to take on the market full steam ahead.
Yeah. Is that an important part, Kedma? I think that what Loren's saying is right. I think sometimes instead of spending a ton of money launching into said country, maybe you do a pilot and get those things ironed out. Oh, this is how Loren smiled, assuming Loren's in international company X. Loren smiled this way, didn't. Is that helpful, Loren, to at least test it? And then from there, once you've hired, you got your feet wet, as it were, then grow from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I would say, and I'm a realist, but I would say there's a lot of positive. One of my favorite countries, because I'm a citizen there, is Ireland. And I will tell you that one of the initiatives Ireland has had for several years is to woo companies into their international space and incentivize them. Those are the things I want to look at. So when I'm carving out a conversation with a company and they're strategically deciding which country to consider first, I say, let's look at the incentives of the country. What are they going to do? Are they going to help to subsidize? Maybe there's going to be a plant and they can support that. Could they subsidize some job creations? What is that country going to do for you? Because they want you there. So there's a lot of upside, but in any situation like that, you have to do your homework before you invest millions, if not billions, and then realize, my goodness, what did we get ourselves into? And let me tell you, there's been situations, I don't want to call out the company, where they made the mistake, they invested millions and millions, and they had to leave the country because they didn't do their due diligence.
Which company was that again, Kevin?
I don't want to embarrass the company.
I tried, Loren. I tried. I think the other thing that's helpful, Loren and Kedma, for this, because I know you both know this as well, is I think not that you can outsource, you want to outsource everything, but for those who are starting out, this is a very mature industry. And as Kedma hinted, countries want, export to import. So if you're looking to go to Africa, you're looking to go to Asia, you're looking to come to the US, the same way we have our State Department that's hungry to open the door. Most other countries are opening the welcome mat and saying, hey, listen, we'll point you to vendors and partners that you can invest with or pay to help you roll into our country. Kedma, I'll turn to you first. That can be another strategy. You don't have to go alone, right?
Without a doubt. I'm from Israel, a country, a big company came in and thought they were going to promote coffee the way that they do in the US. But, in Israel, we're used to Nescafe. We want hard coffee. And at the time, they were selling fufu, cappuccino, and lattes. Remember, Israel is a military country. And they're like, what is this? Fufu, latte, to drink. What is this you're selling us?
Is that how they said it, Kedma?
Absolutely. They said it in Hebrew, but absolutely. And they had to leave. They actually closed. It was one of the only franchise areas that they closed temporarily, left the country before they regrouped. So to your point, yes, partnering, working with the localized community, they're going to see it as a win-win.
Yeah.
And guess what? You're going to have the opportunity to create more jobs for them. So it is definitely a part of the strategy.
Sure. Before we turn up to our guest, the expert with this, Loren, anything you wanted to add to that before I move on and bring in our guest? Anything you wanted to add, Loren?
I just wanted to go back to the technology piece
Please.
of this again. There are ways to take advantage of foreign markets now that didn't used to exist. I was talking to another entrepreneur the other day. He has a payment solution that it's kind of a non-app payment solution that doesn't really have a purpose in this country because there's not a whole lot of friction in payment here anymore. But there are other countries where there is a lot of friction and where his non-app payment solution, actually there's a real desperate need for it. And he's seeking out those markets right now. I think that's, his thinking about it that way is something people should keep in mind, because it's not just physical products. It's not just services. There are a lot of things that you can do.
This has been a great discussion. We have another fine discussion here, bringing in an expert. Today, we're going to hear from Bladnoch's Distillery about its global expansion journey. At 204 years old, Bladnoch is one of Scotland's oldest independent makers of single malt whiskey. After it was shuttered for years, it got a new chance at life when Australian entrepreneur David Pryor acquired it in 2015. Managing its business operations from the other side of the world, he was determined to revive the company and revigorate its rich history in Scotland. He was successful in doing just that. The company has since expanded to 40 markets worldwide and reached 105% growth in 2020. Here to break down Bladnoch's success is Head of Commercial, Will Pitchforth. Will, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to be here all the way from where you are. How are things in your world, Will?
Good, thanks, Ramon. It's about pretty early in the morning here in Australia, where obviously the business is managed. David lives here, and we've been kind of being a lot of lockdowns, open and closing, but right now back open. We can go to our bars and restaurants and drink whiskey out and about, which is pretty important in the business of whiskey making. But thanks very much for having me on. So.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I can't wait to talk to you and hear your insights along with my colleagues, Loren and Kedma. So take a minute or two, Will, and just unpack a bit who you are, your journey to being here today. And then feel free to recap for us a bit about Bladnoch's success, where it's been, where it's at today, and if you don't mind, where you're going.
Sure. So, look, I've worked for Bladnoch for just over 4 years now. I joined in 2017, around the same time that we launched our new rebranded Bladnoch single malt. So, as you mentioned, the distillery is over 200 years old. But after David bought the distillery, there was a couple of years of restarting production and also rebranding and reproducing the Bladnoch single malt in a bottle with a label and a box and with a brand story that kind of suited that history. So I came along when we had whiskey to sell, and my background is in spirits. I used to work for a big French multinational, lived in Paris for a few years, and I've worked on the other side. I've worked in hospitality and for a couple of large hotels and casinos in food and beverage. So I've been kind of in the drinks game for kind of my entire career. And Bladnoch's a whole new challenge. Many people around the world had never heard of Bladnoch, and so for us to bring this distillery to life after sort of 7 or 8 years of being closed, and really 20 or 30 years of really not being well known outside of a few select markets in the UK, this was a really big challenge. So it wasn't quite a greenfield project, but we did have to first tell people what is Bladnoch, and then tell them, okay, here's why you should buy it. So, the last 4 years have kind of been in a few stages. As I mentioned, the rebrand and the rebuild of the distillery took place before I joined, but was obviously very successful, gave us a great suite of products to bring to market. Then the next few years have been kind of adjusting our offer, really looking at our international group of partners, and as you mentioned, expanding to we're now in over 40 countries. And then now it's really about consolidating the best relationships that we've got and really building and growing in a pretty challenging time. You mentioned in the earlier part of your show talking about choosing the right partners and making the right choices when it comes to international expansion. I'll be honest, over the last 4 years we haven't always got it right, and we've had to do a few wind backs and restart again, but we've on the whole, really made good choices with our international partners. I work a lot of evenings because that's when the UK is in the right time zone for us, and so that means that we haven't got we haven't really got the same cultural challenges internally to be working internationally, because we're really very used to it. We're not a company that always has to be sitting down in a face-to-face meeting in a boardroom. And so the adaptations that have had to take place over the last 18 months have really been quite natural. That being said, we still want to go back to Scotland and drink some whiskey. So it hasn't all been smooth sailing. We do miss it. But in terms of how the business operates, we're very accustomed to having to sort of do a lot of these important steps in international expansion and managing our customer base, without physically being present.
Sure. I love that introduction. That was powerful. I have two questions I want to ask you. Then I definitely invite Loren and Kedma to join me in this, especially we talking about global expansion. But one, can you just briefly touch on what was it like to reopen a brand after being closed? Can you think about some of the 2, 3, 4 steps that you did to just, is it like opening up a old building? You open the key and dust it off? How do you do that? Talk to us about that. I'm curious how that worked.
Look, I think there's two parts to it. There's the physical and the plant and equipment side, which need, of course, a bit of renovation, and the stills and the mill and the kind of equipment that's used to make Scotch whiskey. But from our side of it, there was on the kind of brand space, there was a bit of the same. Dusting it off, renovating it. It's 204 years old, and it's a beautiful spot in the south of Scotland. We're the southernmost distillery in Scotland. And like a lot of distilleries, we're quite remote, so we're sort of in the middle of nowhere. Compared to a lot of breweries can be in the middle of town. Distilleries are often nestled away in the hills of Scotland, and so we really had the opportunity to, as I say, introduce the brand to people for the first time. But we could leverage a great 204-year-old history. So that means that while people are discovering Bladnoch for the first time, we're not saying, look, we only turned up last week and we're this brand new product and you should believe in us. We can say, look, we're coming to you. You might have never heard from us, but we've got history. And that works really well in markets such as in Asia and in fact in the US as well, where there's a real respect for, companies that had that longevity. We were, when we were founded in 1817, I think you had probably half as many states of the United States before that. And there are a few policies that thankfully are no longer valid, and there we were making whiskey back in 1817, and there were still pioneers doing the Oregon Trail, getting diphtheria as they went in their wagons, and here we are pumping out Scotch whiskey. So it's amazing, and you kind of really understand the scale of a company that has 200 years of history, and it's that old cliche about. Society's growing great when they plant trees they'll never sit under. We distill whiskey that we as a company are probably never going to drink. We're never going to see. We're never going to sell. But the whole idea is that the reason that we're operating and doing well today is that we had previous owners distilling whiskey, which we now sell today. We're distilling whiskey at the moment that future owners and future generations are going to enjoy, and that longevity really is quite appealing to a lot of markets that maybe don't have that same history, or they don't have that same kind of brace of companies that have that that story. And we leverage that really well, I think, at Bladnoch, where we talk both about the provenance of the brand, but also the progression, new modern packaging, different flavors, and different ways of communicating with consumers, internationally. So we've got, I think, one foot in both camps quite successfully.
Loren, I'd invite you to get ready for another question. But before I do that, I just want to comment. It's amazing how you think of the tech space. We're so used to real-time innovation and all this, but I forgot, distilling something, it's there for X period of time before you sell it. Right. So that's a reminder to all of us how different it is. But Loren Feldman, please join me and let's see what you have on your mind.
Great story, Will. You acknowledge that you've made a couple of missteps along the way. I'm curious, could you tell us what markets were tricky for you and maybe what lessons you learned?
I think a lot of people who work in industries that aren't alcoholic beverages don't realize that the US laws on alcohol import distribution were set in post-prohibition. So at the end of prohibition, they introduced these laws about the tied house and the 3-tier state rules. And really, there's been no change in the sort of subsequent, nearly 90 years. And that's, very challenging for a company like us, who, even though we've taken an old brand, we're trying to communicate it in really modern ways, including direct to consumer, e-commerce, trying to, unify our messaging. And yet the rules on how, we can talk about Scotch whiskey, we can sell Scotch whiskey and promote it are vastly different across the 50 states. And really what that means is that you have to find a really trusted partner locally who really understands the diversity of the US market and how you have really 50 different sets of laws. I mean, Montana, for example, you have to sell to the state liquor board. In California, relatively low taxes and relatively easy to promote your product. In Washington, extremely high state taxes, and so you haven't even got unified pricing across the United States, and that again makes it very difficult to really promote your product when you haven't got a team that understands the idiosyncrasies of the US. And it took us a few tries before we found that partner. We've got an excellent partner now, and very happy to say that US is now our number one export market globally. That being said, it's an expensive one to play in, and there's a lot of challenges. But we've now got listings in around 20 states of the US, which is a big jump from the kind of 2 or 3 that we initially went into. And really, we're very challenged because we didn't understand that market well enough without that on-the-ground partner. And the other thing about the US is that there are plenty of people who will love to, as my father would say, promise you the world, and then they give you an atlas. That was their attitude. They'll come in with these big pictures, very expensive, concepts on how they're going to grow your brand in the US and do a market entry for you, and then what they deliver is pretty underwhelming. But like I say, with a great partner in the US and a very close relationship, and they're really delivering some very good results with us. So.
Before I turn to you, Kedma and Loren, if you have a follow-up, feel free. I'm hearing that partnerships are important, and the challenges are some of the laws. Kedma, please feel free. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I've heard several things. The critical partnership. What I tell my clients is when you align with the partner, they're giving you keys to a door you can't open. And what Will's really referring to is the second piece, which is the advocacy piece. Every single state has had people who have influenced the laws, right? Which is why when I first started, Ramon, first thing I did was I got on the Governor's Council for Small Business, because I knew to make change, you have to influence the law. So Will is really on the mark to say, listen, it's not just can you partner, but can you open doors that have been locked to us? And then can you make the doors easier the next time around? And that's where you really have to align with people who understand governance. The other thing I heard, and I want to make sure I support, was this idea of resilience. And when you build a company and set the mark that you will live in the place of resilience, nothing is going to affect you. That is one of the benefits I have growing up in the Middle East. We're always in chaos. Therefore, nothing really phases us. We really know how to live through that. And when things are really going great, we're like, whoa, why is this happening? Why is it so great? So living through resilience is amazing. And lastly, this idea of rebirthing this history is amazing. And it's been done before. My favorite story is Old Spice. My grandfather used Old Spice as a deodorant. But now my kids love it. Why? Because they went through an amazing rebrand. And in my mind, all of a sudden, I saw some good-looking gentleman hopping on a horse. And I thought, oh, my God, he's coming to find me. I need to get Old Spice. What they did is they tapped into the consumer. And so when Will said, we revisited the brand, we revisited the story, we revisited the history, I think it's something to say about companies who are watching this and saying, how can I revive it? There are actual successful companies that have done it and are doing it. So thank you, Will. It's amazing.
Loren, thank you, Kedma, as well, for the recap. Any follow-up question for Will? Loren, please.
Yeah, I'm dying to ask one more question, Will. I'm curious what the difference you see is between going into a market like the U.S., where we know what whiskey is very well, and there's a lot of competition, versus going into a market where maybe they don't drink a lot of whiskey, but there's less competition. How do you think about the differences?
Look, I think it's a great example. And look, in the 40 markets that we sell to, there's definitely, some big ones like the US. China's also very big for us, and they're really growing in the whiskey space. They've got another love for the story. I mean, much like the US, there's a real appreciation for brands with big, long histories, but that still can present themselves in a way that's relevant. And just to bring back to one of the points that Kedma made earlier in the show, we've actually got a different name for Bladnoch in China. So one of the things that we did, and again, this is a real important thing about language, is that the initial push in China was to try and make a homonym of Bladnoch. There's that famous story about Coca-Cola when they went into China, that they tried to find a homonym, and the one that they chose was when you translate it to Chinese, it meant like dancing on the graves of ancestors or something along these lines. And again, it might be apocryphal, but the whole story was that they tried to make it sound like Coca-Cola in Chinese, but that actually didn't speak to the consumer, even though it was in the Chinese language. Though it was in Putonghua, they couldn't really find a name that worked. And so what we did is we abandoned that completely. We registered a few names. We tried to make something that sounded like Bladnoch. We're using Chinese characters, and we realized that wasn't actually relevant. What we wanted to do is we wanted to have a Chinese consumer hear the name and think really positively of the brand that was associated. So we worked with our local partner, who again is something we work very closely with. China's a great market for us. And rather than taking a kind of a Western or a very parochial view, which is, well, our brand is called Bladnoch, it has to sound like Bladnoch. And so that, when I go to China, if someone says Bladnoch, I hear, that's crazy. Why is that important? What's important to the consumer is that it's an instantly recognizable, unique brand that's easy to say, that's easy to write, looks good on a bottle. And so the name that we came up with, and for any Chinese viewers, you have to excuse my Mandarin, but it's a Panhua. And Panhua is like fire and steel coming together. Wow. And it's about like the fire underneath the distills that distills the whiskey. They're strong words. There's an instant recognizability to them. The characters are simple to draw. They're easy to see when they're in simplified Chinese on like a billboard. And these are considerations that are nothing to do with sounding like the word Bladnoch. And they're nothing to do with, the whiskey or the origin. But what they are is strong words that, again, are easy to say, easy to write. They're easy to write in Romanized characters as well. So all these considerations meant that it was part of our brand and it fit with our brand story, even if it didn't, phonetically sound the same. And so, some of these considerations that you make in non-Western or what I guess you'd say, Loren, the mature whiskey markets need to go beyond simply, how your bottle looks or even how your whiskey tastes. And so I guess that's an example of where we've been quite successful to give away perhaps some of the tightly held, precious kind of, non-negotiables that other companies would say, well, no, we've got to protect this. We can't change anything about us. We've gone, in a different direction and said, let's trust the people we're working with. Let's make sure that we listen to them and actually enact what they're doing. And, I think Israel is another great example. It's our top market in the world for pure Scott. We're one of the top 5 blended Scotch whiskies with our pure Scott whiskies in Israel.
Wow.
Is that Pure Scott is kosher certified. And it's something a lot of companies don't do, and it's quite hard to do for Scotch whiskey, but we've made the effort, and we worked with the London Beth Din to get kosher certification for Bladnoch. And our Israeli customers said, we love Bladnoch, but we really want your blended whiskey, but it's not kosher. We can't advertise it. We can't put it in the window. We can't put it in a catalog unless it's kosher, because, it's just... Otherwise, people go, well, that looks nice, but it's not kosher. I won't buy it. So we went through the process. It was a bit of an investment. We had a rabbi come to Bladnoch and try all the whiskeys and had a lovely time with our distiller. But, walking away from that, we've got that kosher stamp on the back. Now we've actually made a collaboration with a group of Tel Aviv street artists that have made this special because it's Rosh Hashanah next week. And so we've made a special box with a group of Tel Aviv street artists and it's exclusive for Israel. So we're even taking our standard box, which, looks like a bottle of whiskey, and we're completely changing it. So again, it's the question about branding that you made before, 2 examples. In China, we changed the word, and in Israel, we changed the look of our packaging to suit the local market, and we've collaborated with this local artist to tell that story in a local way. It's still our whiskey, still make it in the same way with the same care and attention that we do all around the world, but we tell that story in a different way that really speaks to that local market. And I think that's one of the reasons we've been so successful is that, you get these companies that are really stuck in their ways and often, it needs an intergenerational change to break it out. The kids take over the business or they move to a new, management board and they shake things up. Well, that's kind of what's happened with David taking over is some of the people in Scotland think we're a bit crazy. I mean, we made a pre-mixed whiskey and cola in a can, like a seltzer type product, and people in Scotland thought we were crazy. They say, "Oh, you should only mix whiskey with."
Maybe you are a little crazy. That's okay.
That's not success. And they go, "Look, you should mix nothing with whiskey, not even ice." And we're like, "Well, that doesn't suit." And they're like, "It should be room temperature." I'm like, "I live in Australia. In the summer it could be 115 degrees. room temperature for you in Scotland, where it's like, 45, is a very different story to here in Australia. So we want to put some ice into our whiskey, and we'll enjoy it. We want to mix it. And, slowly there are some traditionalists who are changing. But for us, we just threw out the rule book and we started again, and we started with our customers and worked backwards.
Yeah. Will, I think this was a powerful, powerful story. Kedma, any last quick firebrand question for Will? And Loren, follow up with that. Quick follow-up question or two, and then we'll wrap up this session.
First of all, you just made it sticky. Like, I like this product, but now I love it. This is an example where, he said Rosh Hashanah, which is the new year, right? He said connecting with Tel Aviv, where my family is. He said connecting with the artists. He just made it real, where I went from listening to saying, oh my gosh, as soon as I get off this, I'm going to be calling people, my families in Israel, and say, listen, Rosh Hashanah, you better be getting this whiskey. So
go have a look. Bana Mashkayot is the store. We're doing some good deals at the moment. So.
Loren, any follow-up quick question or comment you want to make to Will before we let him go?
I just think he's got a really impressive story. I love the idea that despite having this 200-year tradition, they went into these markets and were willing to make big, significant changes to make it work in a different market. So that's what I'm taking away.
I love it. Hey, Will, thanks for being here. And Loren chatted to me in the back. He said if you need help tasting anything or checking it out, to call him. So thank you, Will, very much for being here on Growth Hacks. Wish you all the best to the continued 200 more years of growth of Bladnoch. Thanks so much, Will.
Thank you very much for having me. Cheers.
What a great session that was, Kedma and Loren. I think that was so good, and I think we got some great insights from him. Loren, anything you learned? I mean, I could ask 1,000 different things, Loren, but I think one thing, I'll just recap it, about the partnership. Really important. Don't go in there thinking you know it all. 2, I think the localization, China, Israel, US. So I think that localization is important. Those are the 2 things I think we got out of this discussion. But Loren, anything you wanted to add to the audience listening that they should know and underline, or anything you wanted to add on the whole discussion, please?
I guess I would just point to kind of where I started, which is you want to make sure that your base is strong before you start reaching out to other places. And we're talking here with Will, who's from a company that's been around for 200 years. So obviously it makes sense for them to reach out. You don't have to be 200 years old to think about selling around the world. Lots of companies that are much, much younger than that should be, but some shouldn't. And it's important to make sure that you're ready to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's amazing, too. I think that shows you that, I know NetSuite has a number of tools, and basically the all-in-one that I think helps companies like Bladnoch, like what Will is doing, to grow. Because you just can't grow, I think, unless you have your inventory, your people, your shipping, your supply chain, your logistics. It has to be all-in-one and integrated. Kedma, what did you pick up from this discussion? What's one thing that you wish you would have asked, or one thing you can get from us as well?
Well, I mean, I think you and Loren both nailed it. The localization and really doing the proper interviews, really spending time to say, what is the culture? What are the taxes? What are the threats, right? I mean, we talk about this all the time, doing a SWOT analysis, but as companies, we do it one time and we never do it again. It's ridiculous. So I think we need to revisit it, and revisit it often, because laws change. And again, those partners, yes, you're probably going to pay a little penny to use them. But if you don't use them, you're not going to get there anyway. And if you do, it's going to be a struggle. Yeah. What I loved most about this was when Will surprised me with the packaging for Tel Aviv.
That box, yes.
I'll tell you why it surprised me. It surprised me because as a company, they didn't have to go to that level. They didn't have to choose artists. I mean, talk about the pride that you would feel from a country, whether you're in China, whether you're in Europe, whether you're South Africa. He just made it sticky. Yeah. He went from me as a host listening to me being a fan. Now, one last thing. Will doesn't know this. Well, I've been sober 30 years. I will never drink it unless you make it non-alcoholic. However, had I been non-sober, I would have said, I'm going to buy a bottle tomorrow, right? But even so, Ramon, he made me a fan of the company, and that's what's most important.
And you'll be a brand ambassador, refer to others or whatever you may do. So, yeah, to your point.
But I want a percentage, though. I'm not just promoting to promote here. All right?
Loren, do we have to give you % too? Give you a cut of it too?
I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take it in whiskey.
All right. And for those who want to hear about more amazing companies, Loren, Kedma, guess what's happening on September 16th at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. We'll be back here. And thanks so much, all of you. You know what? We love your comments. Venture funding, not venture company. Quick growth, slow growth. Scotch or no scotch. We want to know your comments. My name is Ramon Ray, and thank you for watching Growth Hacks. Don't forget to tell all your friends. Have an awesome day.